The cantina on Station Omega-7 buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries from across the galaxy. In the darkest corner, away from the prying eyes and recording devices, sat a grizzled warrior whose purple carapace bore the scars of countless battles. His forearms trembled slightly as he gripped his glass of fermented algae wine, the strongest substance his species could consume without permanent damage. Across from him sat young Ra, a journalist from the Galactic News Network, her recording device hidden beneath the table. She had spent 3 months tracking down this particular veteran, one of the few survivors from the human war that had ended 5 cycles ago. The official records spoke of strategic withdrawals and negotiated peace treaties, but rumors persisted of something far more terrifying. His compound eyes fixed on the human couple sharing drinks at the bar, their laughter cutting through the ambient noise like plasma through hull plating. His mandibles clicked nervously, a sound that made several nearby patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You want to know about the humans," said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of nightmares that refused to fade. "Everyone thinks they understand what happened in the Outer Rim territories. They think it was just another territorial dispute, resolved through superior tactics and overwhelming force." Ra leaned forward, her own species' natural curiosity overriding the warning signals her survival instincts were screaming. "The official reports say the war ended due to resource depletion and the discovery of new territories in the Andromeda Spiral. But the casualty reports don't add up. We lost nearly 60% of our forward fleet, yet the humans barely had 100 ships." The veteran's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. Casualty reports, statistics, numbers on a screen that administrators used to justify their decisions to the Council of Species. He took a long drink, his hands shaking more noticeably now. "Do you know what those numbers don't tell you? They don't tell you about the screaming." The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the very walls were leaning in to listen. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing Ra to strain her auditory organs to catch every word. "I was an assault commander on the ZWS Predator's Edge, one of the finest warships in the fleet. We had been hunting human supply convoys for 3 weeks without significant contact. Our intelligence suggested they were operating from a hidden base in the 442 system, using the gas giant's moons as cover for their operations." He paused, lost in memories that played behind his eyes like a broken hologram. "We thought we knew what we were dealing with. The humans had been active in space for less than 200 of their years. Primitive chemical rockets had barely evolved into basic fusion drives. Their weapons technology was laughable compared to our plasma arrays and quantum torpedoes." Ra made a note on her hidden device. The condescension in his voice was typical of most species when discussing humanity's relatively recent emergence onto the galactic stage. What made this different was the undertone of fear that seemed to seep through every word. "The first engagement should have been routine," continued. 3 human vessels, apparently cargo haulers based on their energy signatures, were detected moving between the 3rd and 4th moons. Captain Al ordered a standard intercept pattern. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, secure the vessels for intelligence gathering. The veteran's secondary arms began fidgeting with a small metal object, turning it over and over in his palms. Ra recognized it as a standard prayer stone, typically carried by soldiers who had seen too much death. "The humans didn't respond to our surrender demands. They didn't attempt to flee. They just stopped, dead in space, all 3 vessels. Captain Al interpreted this as immediate surrender, exactly what our tactical manuals predicted from a technologically inferior species facing overwhelming odds." His eyes unfocused, staring past Ra into some invisible horror. "We should have recognized the trap. In hindsight, every warning sign was there, but we had been conditioned to expect submission from lesser species. The humans had only been encountered twice before, both times resulting in their immediate capitulation when faced with superior military might." The pause stretched on long enough that Ra wondered if the veteran had retreated into one of the dissociative episodes that plagued many war survivors. She was about to prompt him to continue when he suddenly straightened, his compound eyes refocusing with disturbing intensity. "The boarding operations began exactly according to protocol. 2 assault teams per vessel, standard shock troops armed with neural disruptors and plasma rifles. I was leading Team Delta aboard the largest cargo hauler, a vessel the humans had designated as Fortune's Gamble." His mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of extreme agitation in physiology. The airlock cycled normally. Atmospheric readings showed standard human breathable air mixture, slightly elevated carbon dioxide, but nothing outside expected parameters. The internal layout matched our intelligence files on human cargo vessels. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Ra found herself holding her breath, though she wasn't entirely sure why. The veteran's obvious distress was beginning to affect her own emotional state, a phenomenon she had observed before when interviewing trauma survivors. The first body we found was in the forward cargo hold. A human male, approximately their equivalent of middle age, lying face down beside an overturned cargo container. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. My second-in-command scanned the body for life signs, negative on all readings, complete biological cessation. Sprayer Stone was now being gripped so tightly that his knuckles had turned a darker shade of purple. We proceeded deeper into the vessel, following standard search patterns. 2 more bodies in the crew quarters, another in the navigation section. All the same. No wounds, no signs of violence, just dead. The veteran's voice was becoming increasingly strained, as if each word was being forced out against his will. Suggested environmental systems failure. Perhaps a leak in the life support that had knocked out the crew before they could send a distress signal. It was logical. It made sense. We should have turned around and left the vessel for the teams. Ra realized she was leaning so far forward she was nearly falling off her chair. But you didn't leave. No, whispered. We didn't leave because that's when we heard the singing. The cantina around them seemed to fade into background noise, leaving only the veteran's voice and the terrible weight of whatever memory he was about to share. It was coming from the engine compartment deep in the ship's belly. A human voice, female, singing something in their ancient language. The translator couldn't parse it immediately, but the melody was. He struggled for words. It was beautiful, hauntingly beautiful. His hands had begun shaking so violently that he could no longer hold his glass. We followed the sound, weapons ready but not particularly concerned. A single surviving human, probably traumatized by whatever environmental disaster had killed her. Standard procedure would be to render aid and extract her for questioning. The pause this time was accompanied by a sound Ra had never heard from before, something between a whimper and a growl. The engine room was dark except for the glow of the fusion reactor's containment field. She was sitting cross-legged in front of the main control console, back to us, still singing. Long brown hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She was wearing a simple work coverall, stained with what we assumed was coolant from the ship's systems. Ra found her own hands trembling now, though she couldn't explain why. What happened when you approached her? Called out to her in Galactic Standard, announcing our presence and offering assistance. She stopped singing, just stopped. Complete silence except for the hum of the reactor and our own breathing. His voice dropped to barely audible levels. Then she turned around. The veteran's compound eyes were now wide with terror, as if he was seeing that moment play out in front of him all over again. Her face was wrong. Not injured, not diseased. Wrong. Her eyes were completely black, no iris, no pupil, just solid black orbs that reflected the reactor's glow like pools of oil. Her mouth was stretched in a smile that was too wide, showing too many teeth. Ra felt a chill run down her spine despite the cantina's warm atmosphere. Was she still alive? That's what we couldn't understand, said, his voice breaking. The showed no life signs, no heartbeat, no brain activity, no cellular regeneration, but she was moving, she was looking at us, she was smiling. The veteran's secondary arms had begun clutching at his chest, a stress response Ra recognized from her training in trauma journalism. She spoke to us then, not in Galactic Standard, not in any human language our translators recognized, but somehow we understood every word. She told us we were welcome aboard Fortune's Gamble. She asked if we would like to meet the rest of the crew. His breathing was becoming labored, his carapace taking on a sickly pale hue. That's when the other bodies started moving, the ones we had checked, the ones that were definitely dead. We could hear them throughout the ship, footsteps in the corridors, voices calling out to each other, but not normal voices, voices like the singing, beautiful and wrong. Ra realized she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks in the metal. What did you do? We ran, admitted, shame mixing with terror in his voice. Trained shock troops, veterans of a dozen campaigns, and we ran like younglings fleeing a storm. But as we retreated toward the airlock, more of them appeared. The crew of Fortune's Gamble, walking through the corridors like they had somewhere important to be. The veteran's prayer stone had cracked under the pressure of his grip, small fragments falling to the table between them. They didn't try to stop us. They just watched, smiled those two wide smiles, and watched us flee. When we reached the airlock, the woman from the engine room was waiting for us, standing in the corridor we had just come from, even though we had never passed her. His mandibles were chattering now, a sound that was attracting worried looks from other patrons. She spoke again, in that language that wasn't a language. She said the Empire was welcome to stay as long as we liked. She said there was plenty of room on Fortune's gamble for everyone. She said death was just the beginning of true service to humanity. The veteran suddenly straightened, his eyes focusing on Ra with frightening intensity. "Do you know what happened to the other boarding teams?" Ra shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "They never returned. We waited at the airlocks for 3 hours before Captain Al ordered emergency detachment. When we finally escaped back to the Predator's edge, we could see them through the viewports. The missing teams, standing in the cargo bay windows of all 3 human vessels, waving goodbye. The cantina around them had fallen into an unnatural quiet, as if every conversation had died at exactly the same moment. Seemed to notice for the first time, his compound eyes scanning the room with paranoid intensity. "That should have been the end of it," he continued, lowering his voice even further. "We should have reported the incident, quarantined the area, and called for specialized xenobiology teams to investigate. But Captain Al was ambitious. He saw an opportunity to claim a great victory against humanity with minimal effort." Ra found herself dreading whatever came next. He ordered another attack. "Worse," whispered. "He ordered bombardment, full plasma array targeting, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. The 3 human vessels didn't move, didn't attempt to flee or defend themselves. They just sat there in space while we charged our weapons." The veteran's voice took on a hollow quality, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a deep well. "The first salvo should have been enough. Direct hits on all 3 vessels, multiple hull breaches, atmosphere venting into space. But they didn't explode. They didn't break apart. The hull plating just absorbed the plasma beams like they were being fed into some kind of energy sink." His hands had begun making unconscious warding gestures, symbols from ancient religious practices meant to ward off evil spirits. Then the ships began to change. The hull plating started shifting, flowing like liquid metal but maintaining structural integrity. New sections appeared where there had been empty space. Gun ports opened along the sides of vessels that had been listed as unarmed cargo haulers. The veteran's breathing was becoming increasingly ragged. That's when they returned fire. Ra realized she had been holding her breath for nearly a full minute. "What kind of weapons did they have?" "None that appeared in any database," replied. "Energy beams that passed through our shields like they weren't there. Projectiles that changed direction in mid-flight to track specific targets. But the worst were the things that looked like escape pods." His compound eyes unfocused again, lost in memory. Dozens of them launching from all 3 vessels, small, dark objects that moved with impossible precision. Captain Al ordered point defense systems to engage, but the targeting computers couldn't lock on. The objects seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, there and not there simultaneously. Secondary arms were now wrapped around his torso in a self-protective gesture. "When the first pod impacted our hull, we thought it was just a kinetic projectile. Minimal damage to the outer armor plating, no breach of internal atmosphere. But then the screaming started." The veteran's voice broke completely for a moment before he managed to continue. "Section 7, Deck 3, the impact site. Emergency teams reported crew members in the area had begun exhibiting strange behavior. Cataleptic states followed by periods of violent aggression. The medical teams couldn't find any cause. No radiation exposure, no biological contamination, no chemical agents." Ra found herself frantically taking mental notes, trying to process the implications of what she was hearing. How long before the behavior spread to other areas of the ship? 6 hours, replied without hesitation. By the end of the first day, we had lost contact with 3 entire decks. The few survivors who made it to the safe zones described crew members who had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, but continued working at their stations with mechanical precision. The veteran's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that reminded Ra uncomfortably of funeral music. The bridge tried to maintain control, but the affected crew members weren't hostile in any conventional sense. They followed orders, performed their duties, reported for their shifts exactly on time. The only difference was that they had stopped being afraid. His compound eyes fixed on her with disturbing intensity. Do you understand what that means? Who had stopped feeling fear. Warriors who no longer worried about death. Crew members who would walk into a fusion reactor if ordered, not out of bravery or dedication, but because the concept of self-preservation had been simply removed. The veteran's prayer stone finally crumbled completely, dust and fragments scattering across the table between them. Captain Al ordered immediate evacuation of the affected sections and emergency jump to the nearest safe harbor. But the navigation systems were controlled from Deck 3. The crew members there with the jump order, but the destination coordinates were not what had been input. Ra felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Where did you end up? Earth whispered. The human, specifically in orbit around their largest moon, within effective range of their home defense grid. The cantina around them seemed to fade away entirely, leaving only the veteran's voice and the terrible weight of his memories. That's when we learned what the humans had been preparing for. Not just our small expeditionary force, but the entire war machine. They had been expecting us. His voice took on a quality of religious awe mixed with absolute terror. The defense platforms that rose from the lunar surface weren't built with any technology we recognized. Structures the size of cities, moving with impossible grace despite their massive bulk. And the energy readings, he shuddered. The energy readings suggested power sources equivalent to controlled stellar collapse. The veteran's hands had begun making the sign of the spiral, the most sacred and desperate prayer in culture. But they didn't fire immediately. Instead, we received a transmission. A single human female appearing on our main viewer. She looked exactly like the woman from Fortune's Gamble's engine room. The same face, the same impossibly wide smile, the same black eyes that reflected light like oil. Ra found herself unable to speak, caught between journalistic curiosity and growing terror. She spoke to us in perfect, using formal military protocols, as if she had been studying our language for decades. She welcomed us to Earth space and inquired about the status of our crew. When Captain Al demanded explanations, she tilted her head to one side like a curious child and asked if we would like to see how humans really fight when their survival is threatened. His entire body was shaking now, his carapace having turned an unhealthy pale gray. The view screen switched to show the 3 cargo vessels we had encountered, but they were no longer alone. The space around them was filled with human ships, hundreds of them, thousands. Vessel types that didn't exist in any intelligence file, moving in formations that conventional tactical analysis. The veteran's voice dropped to the barest whisper. And every single ship was crewed by humans who registered as clinically dead on our. Humans who had stopped breathing, stopped aging, stopped dying, but who continued to serve with absolute efficiency and complete fearlessness. Ra realized that her recording device had been capturing far more than just a war story. This was something that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of what humanity was capable of. The woman on the screen smiled wider and told us that humanity had discovered death was optional. She explained that while other species feared extinction, humans had learned to weaponize it. She said that every human who died in service to their species became a permanent addition to their military forces. His compound eyes were now wide with a terror so pure it seemed to radiate from his entire being. She told us that the war was already over, that it had been over from the moment the first ship fired on a human vessel. She said that humanity didn't fight to win territory or resources. They fought to add new recruits to their ever-growing legions of the undead. The veteran stood abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor behind him. That's all I can tell you today. The rest you'll have to wait for. But I'll warn you now, once you hear the complete story, once you understand what humanity is really capable of, you'll never sleep peacefully again. As stumbled away from the table, leaving Ra alone with her racing thoughts and her hidden recording device, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just opened a door that should have remained sealed forever. 3 days passed before Ra managed to track down again. The veteran had disappeared from his usual haunts on Station Omega 7, and only a hefty bribe to an information broker revealed his location in the station's lowest levels, in a section that housed refugees and those trying to stay invisible. She found him in a dingy tavern that catered to species who preferred darker environments. The air was thick with narcotic smoke and the bitter tang of alien alcohol. Sat alone at a corner table, his 4 arms wrapped protectively around a bottle of something that glowed faintly green in the dim lighting. When Ra approached, his compound eyes tracked her movement with the hypervigilance of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. "You came back," he observed, his voice hoarse from whatever he had been drinking. "Most journalists would have published what they already had and moved on to easier stories." "The galaxy deserves to know the truth," Ra replied, settling into the chair across from him. "What you told me 3 days ago. If it's real, then every species in the Council needs to understand what we're dealing with." His mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or despair. "The truth? Yes, I suppose that's what this is about." He took a long drink from his bottle, his hands steadier than they had been during their first meeting. "Tell me, young reporter, have you ever wondered why the official casualty reports from the human war were classified at the highest levels?" Ra had spent the intervening days trying to access those very files through her network connections. Every attempt had been blocked by security protocols she had never encountered before. The Council's official statement was that detailed casualty reports might compromise ongoing diplomatic negotiations with humanity. "Diplomatic negotiations," repeated, his voice dripping with bitter irony. "Is that what they're calling unconditional surrender now?" He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "The truth is there were no casualties in the conventional sense. There were only conversions." The veteran's compound eyes fixed on something beyond the tavern's walls, seeing events that had occurred light years away and cycles in the past. After the woman on the screen finished explaining humanity's new relationship with death, the defense platforms around Earth's moon began moving into attack formation. But before they could fire, Captain Al received an emergency transmission from the High Command. Ra activated her hidden recording device, nodding that seemed more willing to talk tonight, as if the alcohol had loosened whatever psychological barriers had been holding back his memories. The transmission was garbled, coming through at least 6 quantum relay stations, but the message was clear enough. The main battle fleet was under attack in the Vega system, not by human ships but by something else, something that the fleet commanders described as impossible before all communication was lost. Secondary arms began making the same nervous gestures Ra had observed during their first meeting. The woman on Earth's transmission smiled that terrible smile and informed us that humanity's war doctrine had evolved beyond simple territorial defense. She explained that while we had been hunting their cargo vessels in the Outer Rim, they had been systematically infiltrating every major military installation in known space. The veteran paused to take another drink, and Ra noticed his hands were beginning to shake again despite the alcohol. "Infiltrating how? Our security systems would have detected any unauthorized biological presence." "That's just it," whispered. "They weren't detecting biological presence because the infiltrators weren't alive in any conventional sense. The humans had found a way to animate their dead, to give them purpose and direction while maintaining all their skills and memories from life." The veteran's voice took on the quality of someone reciting a nightmare that had played out behind his eyes countless times. The woman explained it like she was discussing the weather. Humanity had discovered that consciousness could exist independently of biological function. Death was merely a transition state, not an ending. And humans who underwent this transition retained all their knowledge, all their training, all their hatred for those who threatened their species. Ra felt cold understanding wash over her. "You're saying the humans were using zombie infiltrators?" "Zombie is too simple a term," replied. "These weren't shambling corpses driven by base instincts. These were fully functional human operatives who no longer needed to breathe, eat, or sleep. They could survive in hard vacuum, withstand radiation that would kill any living being, and operate indefinitely without rest or resupply." The veteran's compound eyes had taken on the glassy quality that Ra was beginning to recognize as a sign that he was accessing particularly traumatic memories. The Vega system attack wasn't an external assault. It was an uprising. Hundreds of human corpses that had been positioned throughout our fleet over the course of months, all activating simultaneously when the signal came from Earth. His mandibles clicked rapidly as he continued. Support staff, maintenance workers, even some who had been processed as prisoners of war weeks earlier. They had been inside our ships the entire time, learning our systems, mapping our weaknesses, waiting for the moment to strike. The tavern around them seemed to grow quieter, other patrons unconsciously moving away from their table, as if sensing the gravity of the conversation taking place. But how could they have infiltrated so thoroughly without detection? "Because we weren't looking for them. admitted, shame mixing with terror in his voice. Our medical scanners were designed to detect life signs, not the absence of them. A human operative who had the transition would register as a corpse, and corpses don't trigger security alerts. The veteran's secondary arms had begun clutching at his chest again, a stress response that seemed to intensify whenever he recalled specific details. The woman on the screen showed us tactical displays of what was happening in the Vega system. Our finest warships, the pride of the fleet, being systematically disabled from within by crews of the undead. Ra found herself leaning forward despite her growing unease. Disabled how? Precision sabotage, replied. Engine systems overloaded at exactly the right moment to prevent escape but not destroy the ship. Life support systems modified to introduce sedatives into the atmosphere. Weapons arrays rewired to fire on friendly vessels. It wasn't random destruction, it was surgical conversion of our entire fleet into human assets. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing Ra to strain her hearing to catch every word. But the worst part was watching the crew reactions. Our soldiers, our finest warriors, faced with enemies who felt no pain, showed no fear, and could not be permanently killed. How do you fight an opponent who treats death as a minor inconvenience? His hands were gripping his bottle so tightly that stress fractures were beginning to appear in the glass. The tactical displays showed troops falling back deck by deck, level by level, not because they were cowards, but because their training had become useless. Every combat doctrine we had developed was based on fighting enemies who wanted to survive the encounter. The veteran's compound eyes fixed on Ra with disturbing intensity. Do you understand the psychological impact of facing an opponent who charges directly into plasma fire, who continues advancing even after taking wounds that would drop a normal being, who smiles while dying because they know death is just another weapon in their arsenal? Ra realized she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks in the metal. How long did the Vega system hold out? 18 hours, replied without hesitation. 18 hours for the humans to convert or destroy the largest military force the Empire had ever assembled. When it was over, we had lost 47 capital ships, 300 escort vessels, and nearly 2 million crew members. The veteran paused to finish his drink, then immediately reached for another bottle from a collection beside his chair. But here's what the official reports don't mention. We didn't just lose ships and personnel. We lost them to the humans. Every vessel that survived the uprising was crewed by our own people, now serving under human command. Ra felt her blood chill as the implications became clear. The humans were converting crew members. Not converting, corrected, his voice taking on a hollow quality. Recruiting. The humans didn't kill our people and reanimate them. They made them an offer. Join willingly and retain your consciousness and personality after death. Refuse and face immediate execution with no guarantee of useful afterlife. The veteran's mandibles clicked in a pattern that reminded Ra of funeral dirges. Can you imagine being faced with that choice? Knowing that death is inevitable, but being offered the chance to continue serving, continue existing, continue experiencing something resembling life. What would you choose? The question hung in the air between them like a physical presence, demanding consideration that Ra wasn't sure she was ready to give. How many chose to join them? According to the woman on the screen, approximately 73% of personnel in the Vega system accepted the offer, replied. The remainder were executed and their bodies disposed of in the most energy-efficient manner possible. The veteran's compound eyes had taken on the glassy quality again, staring past Ra into some invisible horror. She showed us video feeds from the converted vessels, our own people, still wearing uniforms, still carrying out their duties with the same efficiency they had shown in life. But their eyes. His voice broke for a moment before he managed to continue. Their eyes were different, still intelligent, still aware, but missing something essential. The spark that made them individuals rather than just highly efficient biological machines. The tavern around them had fallen into an unnatural quiet, as if every conversation had died simultaneously. Ra noticed that several other patrons were now watching their table with obvious unease, though none seemed willing to approach. The woman concluded her presentation by informing Captain Al that Earth's defense platforms had been tracking our ship since the moment we entered the system. She explained that we had 3 options: surrender and join humanity's growing fleet, attempt to flee and be destroyed by overwhelming firepower, or transmit the terms of humanity's offer to the High Command. Ra found herself holding her breath. What were the terms? Complete cessation of hostilities against human interests, immediate withdrawal from all territories humanity considered strategically important, and payment of reparations in the form of technological data and raw materials. His voice had taken on the mechanical quality of someone reciting information that had been burned into their memory. In exchange, humanity would offer individual the opportunity to join their post-death military service, but only on a voluntary basis. The veterans' secondary arms had begun making protective gestures again, symbols from ancient religious practices. Captain Al asked what would happen if the Empire rejected these terms. The woman's smile somehow became even wider, revealing teeth that were definitely not standard human dental structure. His hands were shaking so violently now that he could barely maintain his grip on his bottle. She explained that humanity had been preparing for this war for much longer than anyone realized. While the galaxy's intelligence services had been monitoring human space exploration and colony expansion, they had missed the real threat. Humanity had been exploring death itself. The veteran's voice dropped to the barest whisper. She showed us data feeds from human research facilities that had been hidden in asteroid belts and rogue planets throughout the galaxy. Laboratories where human scientists had been studying the boundary between life and death, finding ways to preserve consciousness beyond biological function. Ra felt growing dread as she began to understand the scope of what she was hearing. How long had they been conducting this research? According to the data feeds, at least 50 years, replied. Possibly longer. The woman explained that humanity had recognized their biological limitations early in their expansion into space. They were short-lived, fragile, and vastly outnumbered by older galactic species. But they had one advantage: they were completely insane. The veteran's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that was becoming increasingly frantic. She said that while other species had spent learning to live with death, humanity had decided to weaponize it instead. They had developed techniques for preserving human consciousness beyond biological death, creating soldiers who could fight for centuries without rest, reinforcement, or resupply. His compound eyes fixed on Ra with an intensity that made her want to flee the tavern immediately. But the most terrifying part was her explanation of humanity's long-term strategy. This wasn't just about winning a war against the Empire. This was about fundamentally changing the balance of power in the galaxy. The veteran's voice took on a quality of religious awe mixed with absolute terror. She explained that humanity's ultimate goal was to offer every species in the galaxy the same choice they had given us: join their collective willingly and retain individual consciousness after death, or face conversion through more direct methods. Ra realized that her recording device had been capturing far more than just a war story. This was intelligence that could affect the survival of every known civilization. Did she explain what more direct methods meant? She showed us, whispered, video feeds from human research facilities where they had been experimenting on captured members of various species, learning how to preserve non-human consciousness, how to maintain alien psychology beyond biological death. The veteran's entire body was shaking now, his carapace having turned the sickly pale gray that indicated extreme physiological distress. The experiments weren't random. They were systematic studies of how different species' minds worked, how their consciousness could be preserved and directed after death. Humanity was building a database of every major galactic species, preparing to convert the entire galaxy into willing servants of their growing empire of the dead. Suddenly stood, his chair falling backward with a crash that echoed through the quiet tavern. Captain Al made his choice. He agreed to transmit humanity's terms to the High Command, but the woman informed us that our ship would remain in Earth space until a response was received. She said humanity wanted to ensure their message was delivered accurately. The veteran's voice had become increasingly strained, as if each word was being forced out against his will. We remained in orbit around Earth's moon for 6 days. 6 days during which we could observe human activities on the lunar surface. Construction projects the size of cities, involving millions of workers who never stopped for rest or sustenance. Industrial facilities that operated continuously, staffed by beings who had transcended the need for sleep or food. Ra found herself frantically taking mental notes, trying to process the implications of what she was hearing. What was the High Command's response? Unconditional surrender, replied, his voice barely audible. Complete acceptance of all human terms, along with a formal request to begin negotiations for admission to humanity's post-death collective. The veteran's mandibles were chattering uncontrollably now, producing sounds that were attracting increasingly worried looks from other patrons. The woman appeared on our screen one final time to inform us that humanity accepted the Empire's surrender. She explained that conversion facilities would be established in major population centers for any individuals who wished to join humanity's eternal military service. His compound eyes had taken on the unfocused quality that Ra was beginning to recognize as a sign that he was accessing the most traumatic memories. But she also warned us that humanity's expansion wouldn't stop with the Empire. Every species in the galaxy would eventually face the same choice we had been given: join willingly or face forced conversion. The veteran's voice broke completely as he delivered his final statement. She said that humanity's ultimate goal was galactic unity through shared death, a civilization where every being could serve eternally without the limitations of biological existence, a galaxy where death was not an ending, but a promotion to a higher form of service. As stumbled away from the table, leaving Ra alone with her racing thoughts and her hidden recording device, she realized that she had just learned information that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity's true intentions. But she also understood that sharing this knowledge might doom every free species to the same fate that had befallen the Empire. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden as she sat alone in the darkened tavern, surrounded by the whispered conversations of beings who had no idea how fundamentally their universe had already changed. The encrypted message reached Ra 7 days after her second meeting with. It contained only coordinates to a location in the abandoned industrial sector of Station Omega-7 and a time, 3 hours after the station's artificial dawn cycle. No sender identification, no authentication codes, but somehow she knew it was from the veteran. She found him in what had once been a cargo processing facility, surrounded by the skeletal remains of automated sorting machinery. The space was vast and echoing, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Stood near the center of the chamber, his 4 arms wrapped around himself in a protective gesture that had become increasingly familiar. "You've been researching," he observed without preamble as Ra approached. His compound eyes tracked her movement with the hypervigilance of someone who expected attack from any direction. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the weight of knowledge that wasn't meant for civilians." Ra had spent the week attempting to verify portions of account through her network of intelligence contacts. What she had discovered was almost more terrifying than the veteran's stories, a systematic pattern of information suppression that extended across multiple species and governments. "Every official source I've contacted has given me the same response. The human war is classified beyond my security clearance, and further inquiries could result in criminal prosecution." His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. Of course they have. The Council of Species has been very thorough in their efforts to maintain public morale. Can't have billions of sentient beings learning that their governments have already surrendered to humanity's expansion plans. The veteran began packing in a wide circle around the chamber's center, his movements betraying an agitation that seemed to increase with each step. "But you found something, didn't you? Some piece of evidence that suggests my account might be more than the ravings of a trauma-addled soldier." Ra had indeed found something, though it had taken considerable effort and several illegal database intrusions to locate. Shipping manifests from the weeks following the official end of the war. Massive cargo movements to previously unknown coordinates in human space. Materials and equipment that matched the specifications for large-scale life support systems and industrial construction. "Industrial construction," repeated, his voice taking on the hollow quality she had come to associate with his most disturbing revelations. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe what humanity has been building, though industrial might not be the most accurate term for facilities designed to process the recently deceased." The veteran stopped packing abruptly, his compound eyes fixing on Ra with an intensity that made her want to flee the abandoned facility immediately. "You want to know what happened after Captain Al transmitted humanity's terms to the High Command? You want to understand how an empire that had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 1,000 years could capitulate so completely to a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight 2 centuries ago?" Ra activated her recording device, though she was beginning to wonder if some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve. The timeline doesn't make sense. Even if everything you've told me is accurate, the Empire had military forces spread across dozens of systems. Humanity couldn't have defeated them all simultaneously. You're right, agreed, his secondary arms beginning their familiar nervous gestures. Humanity didn't defeat the Empire, they recruited it, and the process began long before the first shot was fired in what history will record as the Human War. The veteran's voice took on the mechanical quality of someone reciting information that had been burned into their memory through repetition. While we remained in orbit around Earth's moon, waiting for the High Command's response, the woman who had been serving as humanity's spokesman began showing us additional data, historical records that revealed the true scope of their preparation. Resumed packing, but his movements were more controlled now, as if he was settling into the familiar rhythm of revealing terrible truths. Humanity's expansion into space had never been about exploration or colonization in the traditional sense. Every survey mission, every trading expedition, every diplomatic contact had been part of a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. The veteran's compound eyes had taken on the glassy quality that indicated he was accessing particularly traumatic memories. They had been studying us for decades, not just our technology or our military capabilities, but our psychology, our social structures, our religious beliefs, everything they needed to understand how we would react when faced with their ultimate offer. Ra found herself taking involuntary steps backward as the implications became clear. You're saying the entire human space program was designed as a prelude to galactic conquest. Not conquest, corrected, his voice carrying a note of disturbing admiration. Conversion. Humanity had recognized that traditional military conquest would be unsustainable against the combined forces of the galactic community. But they had also recognized that every species in the galaxy shared one fundamental weakness, the fear of death. The veteran's mandibles clicked in a pattern that Ra was beginning to recognize as a stress response. The woman explained it like a professor delivering a lecture to students. Humanity had conducted extensive psychological studies of every major galactic species, and they had discovered that the fear of personal extinction was universal. Every culture, every religion, every philosophical system was ultimately an attempt to cope with the inevitability of death. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing Ra to move closer despite her growing unease. But humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had conquered death itself, not through medical technology or life extension, but by fundamentally redefining what death meant. The veteran stopped packing and turned to face her directly, his compound eyes reflecting the facility's dim lighting like pools of oil. She showed us video feeds from the first successful human death transcendence experiments, volunteers who had the process of consciousness preservation, demonstrating that their personalities, memories, and capabilities remained intact despite the cessation of biological function. Ra felt cold understanding wash over her as she began to comprehend the scope of humanity's psychological warfare. They were using immortality as a recruitment tool. More than that, replied. They were using it as the foundation for a completely new form of civilization, a society where death was not an ending but a promotion to a higher level of service, where every individual could contribute to the collective good for eternity without the limitations of biological existence. The veteran's secondary arms had begun clutching at his chest again, a stress response that seemed to intensify whenever he recalled specific details. The woman showed us sociological models that humanity had developed over decades of secret research, predictions of how different species would react when offered the choice between traditional death and conscious immortality through service to humanity. His voice took on a quality of religious awe mixed with absolute terror. According to their models, approximately 80% of sentient beings would choose conscious immortality when faced with the alternative of permanent extinction. The remaining 20% could be convinced through various forms of psychological pressure or direct demonstration of the benefits. The veteran resumed packing, but his movements had become increasingly agitated. But here's the most terrifying part of their plan. Humanity wasn't just offering immortality to individuals. They were offering it to entire cultures, entire species, entire civilizations. Join willingly and preserve your cultural identity for eternity. Resist and face the gradual erosion of everything that made your people unique. Ra found herself gripping the edge of a nearby piece of machinery to steady herself against the growing weight of implications. How could they guarantee preservation of cultural identity? Because they had been studying us so thoroughly, explained, his voice becoming increasingly strained. Every language, every tradition, every social custom had been documented and analyzed. Humanity had created comprehensive databases of galactic culture that would allow them to recreate the essential characteristics of any civilization, even after the original biological population had been converted. The veteran's compound eyes had taken on an unfocused quality, staring past Ra into some invisible horror. She showed us examples, reconstructed communities of species that had voluntary conversion in exchange for immortal preservation of their cultural heritage. Cities populated entirely by the conscious dead, maintaining their traditional social structures and customs for eternity. His voice broke for a moment before he managed to continue. But there were subtle differences. The converted beings maintained all their memories and personalities, but they had been optimized. Negative emotions had been reduced to manageable levels. Destructive behaviors had been eliminated. Interpersonal conflicts had been resolved through careful psychological adjustment. The veteran's mandibles clicked rapidly as he continued. In essence, humanity was offering perfected versions of ourselves, all the benefits of our original personalities and cultures, but with the problematic aspects smoothed away through careful post-death modification. Ra realized she was holding her breath. What happened when Captain Al received the High Command's response? The response came exactly 72 hours after our original transmission, replied without hesitation. A coded message that contained more than just acceptance of humanity's terms. It contained detailed information about military installations, troop movements, and defense strategies. The veteran's voice took on a hollow quality that suggested he was recounting events that had fundamentally shattered his understanding of reality. The High Command hadn't just surrendered. They had become active collaborators. The message included offers to assist humanity in the conversion of other military units, along with strategic advice on how to approach other galactic species. Secondary arms had begun making protective gestures again, symbols from ancient religious practices meant to ward off evil influences. The woman appeared on our screen to acknowledge receipt of the High Command's message. She thanked Captain Al for his role in facilitating peaceful communication between species, and she offered him a choice. The veteran's hands were beginning to shake again, despite his obvious efforts to maintain control. He could return to the Empire and assist in the establishment of conversion facilities for volunteers, or he could undergo the transcendence process immediately and begin serving humanity as an immortal liaison between species. Ra felt growing dread as she understood where this narrative was leading. What did Captain Al choose? He asked for time to consider, whispered. The woman smiled that terrible smile and granted him 24 hours to make his decision. She explained that this was more time than most beings received, but that humanity valued his potential contributions to cooperation. The veteran's compound eyes fixed on her with disturbing intensity. During those 24 hours, we were allowed to observe human operations on the lunar surface in greater detail. Construction projects that involved millions of workers operating in perfect coordination, without any apparent supervision or rest periods. His voice dropped to the barest whisper. We watched them building cities designed to house the converted dead from hundreds of different species. Residential areas that replicated the architectural styles and environmental preferences of civilizations from across the galaxy. Cultural preservation on an unprecedented scale. The veteran's mandibles were chattering now, producing sounds that echoed strangely in the vast abandoned facility. But we also saw the processing centers, facilities where the recently deceased were brought for consciousness extraction and personality preservation. Industrial-scale operations designed to handle the conversion of entire planetary populations. Ra found herself frantically taking mental notes while fighting the urge to flee the facility immediately. How many species had already been processed? According to the data we were shown, 17 species had voluntary conversion, replied. Smaller civilizations mostly, those with populations of less than 1 billion individuals. Humanity had been using them as test subjects to refine their conversion processes and cultural preservation techniques. The veteran's voice took on a quality of bitter irony. The woman explained that these early conversions had been entirely successful. Every individual had retained their personality and memories, and each species had been able to maintain their cultural practices within the framework of humanity's greater collective. His entire body was shaking now, his carapace having turned the sickly pale gray that indicated extreme physiological distress. She showed us videos of converted beings from these species, demonstrating that they remained recognizably themselves despite the cessation of biological function. They spoke in their native languages, practiced their traditional customs, and maintained their historical social relationships. The veteran's voice became increasingly strained as he continued. But their eyes were different, still intelligent, still aware, but missing something essential. The spark that made them individuals rather than just highly efficient biological machines serving humanity's greater purpose. Suddenly stopped packing, his compound eyes fixing on a point somewhere beyond the facility's walls. Captain Al made his choice after observing those videos. He requested immediate conversion for himself and volunteered to serve as a liaison between humanity and the remaining unconverted population. The veteran's voice broke completely as he delivered his next statement. The woman's smile somehow became even wider as she accepted his offer. She explained that Captain Al would undergo conversion aboard our own ship, using portable equipment that humanity had developed for field operations. Ra felt her blood chill as the implications became clear. They converted him while you watched. All of us whispered. The entire crew was offered the same choice. Join Captain Al in immortal service to humanity or remain aboard ship as observers while he underwent the process. The veteran's mandibles clicked in a pattern that reminded Ra of funeral dirges. 37 crew members chose immediate conversion. 15 chose to observe. The remainder, including myself, requested transfer to escape pods for return to space. His compound eyes had taken on the glassy quality that indicated he was accessing the most traumatic memories. The woman granted all requests without argument. She explained that humanity valued free choice above all else, and that forced conversion resulted in suboptimal personality preservation. The veteran's voice dropped to barely audible levels. But before we departed, she insisted that we observe Captain Al's conversion as a gesture of diplomatic courtesy. She said it was important for us to witness the process so we could accurately report its nature to others who might be considering the same choice. Ra realized she was gripping the machinery so tightly that her hands were beginning to cramp. What was the conversion process like? Beautiful, replied, and for the first time since she had met him, there was something other than terror in his voice. Horrifyingly beautiful. Captain Al was conscious throughout the entire process, able to speak and interact normally as his biological functions were gradually replaced by humanity's consciousness preservation technology. The veteran's voice took on a quality of religious awe mixed with absolute terror. He described the experience as liberating. The gradual cessation of biological needs, the elimination of physical pain and fatigue, the expansion of consciousness beyond the limitations of organic neural networks. Secondary arms had begun making protective gestures again, but more slowly, as if he was fighting against some internal conflict. When the process was complete, he was still recognizably Captain Al. Same personality, same memories, same command presence, but he had also become something more, something that served humanity's greater purpose with perfect dedication. The veteran's compound eyes fixed on Ra with an intensity that made her want to run screaming from the facility. He thanked us for witnessing his transformation and expressed hope that we would choose to join him in service to humanity's galactic collective. Then he said something that I've never been able to forget. Ra found herself unable to speak, caught between journalistic curiosity and growing terror. He told us that death was not the opposite of life, but its completion, that everything we had experienced as living beings was just preparation for the greater service that awaited us after conversion. He said that humanity had discovered the true purpose of consciousness, and that they were offering to share that discovery with every species in the galaxy. His voice dropped to the barest whisper as he delivered his final statement. As our escape pods launched from the ship, I could see Captain Al standing in the observation deck, watching our departure. He was smiling, and for just a moment I wondered if we were the ones making the wrong choice. The veteran's entire body was trembling now as he turned away from Ra. That's why I'm here, in this abandoned facility, drinking myself into unconsciousness every night. because part of me still wonders if Captain Al was right. If death really is just another kind of promotion, and if humanity is offering the galaxy something far more valuable than we're capable of understanding. As walked away into the shadows of the abandoned facility, leaving Ra alone with her recording device and her racing thoughts, she realized that she had just heard something that might be the most dangerous information in the galaxy. Not because it revealed humanity's plans, but because it made those plans sound almost reasonable. Ra spent 2 weeks attempting to process the information had shared before she realized she was being watched. Subtle signs at first, conversations that stopped when she entered a room, familiar faces that appeared too frequently in different locations, the feeling of eyes tracking her movements through the crowded corridors of Station Omega 7. The confirmation came when she returned to her quarters to find her personal computer displaying a message that had not been there when she left. No transmission logs, no security alerts, just words appearing on her screen as if they had materialized from nothing. Meet us in Cargo Bay 94. Come alone. Come now. Cargo Bay 94 was located in one of the station's oldest sections, a cavernous space that had been sealed off for repairs that never seemed to begin. Ra found the entrance unlocked despite its official status, and the bay itself illuminated by a single maintenance light that cast harsh shadows across the empty chamber. She was not alone. 3 figures stood in the center of the bay, and as her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, she realized she recognized one of them. Commander Al of the Hegemony Intelligence Service, a being whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his efficiency in protecting state secrets. "Journalist Ra," Al said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You have been conducting interviews with war veteran regarding classified military operations. This activity ends now." The other 2 figures moved to flank Ra, their positions suggesting they were prepared to use force if necessary. She recognized them as enforcement specialists, the kind of beings who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. "The information you have gathered poses a threat to galactic stability," Al continued. "Your recording devices have captured details that could cause widespread panic among civilian populations. We are here to ensure that panic does not occur." Ra felt cold understanding wash over her as she realized the true scope of what she had stumbled into. "You're not just suppressing information about the war. You're actively collaborating with humanity's expansion plans." Al's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested that her guess had hit uncomfortably close to the truth. The galactic community faces choices that civilians are not equipped to understand. Our role is to ensure those choices are made with complete information rather than emotional reactions based on incomplete data. One of the enforcement specialists took a step forward, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. "The journalist has accessed classified information without authorization. Standard protocol requires immediate containment." "Wait," Al ordered, raising a hand to stop his subordinate. "Journalist Ra, you have demonstrated considerable resourcefulness in gathering your information. That resourcefulness could be useful in the right circumstances." Ra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bay's temperature. "You're offering me a choice, work for you or disappear permanently." "I am offering you the opportunity to understand the complete picture," Al corrected. "The information you have gathered from represents only a small fraction of what the galactic leadership has learned about humanity's intentions. Would you like to know the rest?" Despite every survival instinct screaming at her to refuse, Ra found herself nodding. The journalist in her needed to know the complete truth, even if that knowledge came with a price she might not be willing to pay. Al gestured to his subordinates, who immediately moved to secure the bay's entrance. "What I am about to tell you is classified at levels that exist above the official security structure. This information is known only to the highest levels of government in each member species of the Galactic Council." The commander's voice took on the quality of someone reciting facts that had been burned into memory through repetition. "Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization occurred 137 years ago, when a human exploration vessel encountered a patrol ship in the outer regions of what is now called the Neutral Zone." Ra activated her recording device out of habit, then immediately wondered if doing so would result in her immediate execution. Al noticed the gesture but made no move to stop her. "Official records indicate that first contact was peaceful, resulting in limited cultural and technological exchange. But those records are fabricated. The truth is that the human vessel immediately attacked the patrol ship, overwhelmed its defenses, and captured the entire crew. Al began packing in a wide circle around the bay's center, his movements betraying an agitation that seemed unusual for someone of his reputation. The captured crew was transported to a human research facility where they underwent extensive psychological and biological analysis. Everything about physiology, psychology, and culture was systematically documented. The commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But the most significant discovery was that humans could successfully preserve consciousness beyond biological death. The first successful conversion occurred within weeks of that initial capture. Ra felt her blood chill as the implications became clear. Humanity has been perfecting their conversion process for over a century. Longer, Al confirmed. Intelligence suggests that humans developed consciousness preservation technology shortly after achieving interstellar flight. Their entire expansion into space has been a systematic research program designed to catalog and understand every form of sentient life in the galaxy. The commander stopped packing and fixed his attention on Ra with uncomfortable intensity. Every species that humans have encountered has been studied in the same manner. Captured specimens, detailed analysis, conversion experiments. By the time official first contact occurs, humanity already possesses complete information about how to convert that species to their collective. One of the enforcement specialists moved closer, and Ra noticed that his weapon was now in his hand, though not yet pointed in her direction. The journalist is recording classified information without authorization. Let her record, Al replied. She needs to understand the complete scope of what we are dealing with before she can make an informed decision about her future actions. The commander's voice took on a quality of resignation mixed with fear. The human war was not an isolated conflict. It was a demonstration project designed to show the galactic community what humanity was capable of. Every engagement, every strategy, every outcome had been planned in advance based on detailed analysis of military doctrine. Ra found herself leaning forward despite the obvious danger of her situation. You're saying the entire war was staged? Not staged, Al corrected. Controlled. Humanity allowed the Empire to believe they were fighting a conventional conflict while systematically demonstrating the futility of resistance against their conversion technology. The commander's voice became increasingly strained as he continued. Analysis of captured human communications reveals that they refer to these demonstrations as recruitment drives. Each species that witnesses humanity's capabilities faces the same choice: voluntary conversion with preserved cultural identity, or forced conversion after military defeat. Al resumed packing, but his movements had become more agitated. The galactic leadership has been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Resistance to humanity's expansion is futile. Their technology is too advanced, their tactics too refined, and their strategic patience too extensive. Ra felt growing dread as she began to understand why she was being shown this information. The Galactic Council has already decided to surrender. The Galactic Council has decided to negotiate, Al corrected, though his tone suggested the distinction was largely semantic. Official representatives from each member species have been in secret communication with humanity for the past 18 months, working out the details of a galaxy-wide conversion program. The commander stopped packing and turned to face her directly. Humanity has demonstrated remarkable flexibility in their negotiating position. They are willing to preserve not just individual consciousness and cultural identity, but also existing governmental structures and social hierarchies. Ra realized she was gripping her recording device hard enough to leave marks in its casing. They're offering to maintain the illusion of independence while converting everyone to their collective. More than illusion, Al replied. Functional independence within an overarching framework of shared purpose. Each species would maintain their traditional social structures and decision-making processes, but all major policies would be coordinated through humanity's collective consciousness network. The commander's voice took on a quality of disturbing admiration. From humanity's perspective, this approach is far more efficient than traditional conquest. Rather than destroying existing social structures and rebuilding from nothing, they preserve what works and integrate it into their larger system. One of the enforcement specialists moved closer to Ra, his weapon now clearly visible though still not directly threatening. The journalist has heard classified information. Standard protocol requires immediate processing. Processing? Ra asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Consciousness extraction and personality preservation, Al explained matter-of-factly. Individuals with access to sensitive information undergo immediate conversion to prevent unauthorized disclosure. Your consciousness would be preserved with full personality retention, but you would serve humanity's galactic collective rather than pursuing independent journalism. The commander's voice carried no emotion as he delivered this information, as if he was discussing routine administrative procedures rather than the elimination of her individual existence. The process is painless and results in significant enhancement of cognitive capabilities. Most subjects report satisfaction with their post-conversion existence. Ra found herself backing away from the enforcement specialists, her mind racing to find some escape from the trap that was closing around her. Told me that individuals have a choice, voluntary conversion or death. This information is outdated, Al replied. Current protocols allow for a third option, temporary conversion for specific purposes. Your consciousness would be preserved and your personality maintained, but you would serve as an intelligence asset for the transitional period leading up to full galactic integration. The commander's voice took on a persuasive quality that made Ra suspect he had some form of psychological modification himself. Consider the benefits: enhanced cognitive capabilities, access to humanity's collective knowledge base, and the opportunity to serve the greater good of galactic civilization. Your journalistic skills would be invaluable in helping other species understand the advantages of willing cooperation. Ra realized that the enforcement specialists had moved to block all possible exits from the cargo bay. And if I refuse all options, then you would be processed for standard conversion, Al admitted. Your consciousness would be preserved, but your individual personality would be adjusted to ensure optimal service to the collective. You would retain your memories and skills, but your motivations would be aligned with humanity's greater purpose. The commander stepped closer, and Ra could see something in his eyes that suggested he might have already partial conversion himself. The choice is yours, but it must be made now. Delay serves no purpose except to complicate the integration process. Ra looked around the cargo bay, noting the positions of the enforcement specialists and calculating her odds of escape. The mathematics were depressingly clear. She had no chance of physically leaving the bay unless these beings allowed it. There is another option, a familiar voice said from the shadows near the bay's entrance. Stepped into the light, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh illumination like pools of oil. An option that Commander Al has chosen not to mention. Al turned sharply, his hand moving to his weapon. Veteran, you are in violation of containment protocols. Return to your designated quarters immediately. My quarters? Laughed, the sound carrying a bitter edge that made the cargo bay seem even colder. You mean the cell where you've been keeping me while you decided whether my information was too dangerous to leave uncorrected. The veteran stepped fully into the light, and Ra could see that his carapace bore fresh scars, the kind that suggested recent interrogation or medical procedures. Commander Al, would you like to tell journalist Ra about the real choice you've been offered, or shall I? Al's weapon was now in his hand, pointed directly at. Stand down, veteran. Your psychological instability makes you unsuitable for participation in sensitive negotiations. Psychological instability, repeated, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that sounded like laughter. Is that what you're calling it when someone refuses to accept that galactic civilization is about to voluntarily commit suicide? The veteran's compound eyes fixed on Ra with disturbing intensity. The choice that Commander Al hasn't mentioned is resistance, not military resistance. That would be futile, but informational resistance, ensuring that every being in the galaxy understands exactly what humanity is offering before they make their decision. Ra felt a spark of hope mixed with terror. You want me to publish what I've learned? I want you to publish everything, replied. Not just my account of the war, but the complete truth about humanity's expansion plans and the galactic leadership's collaboration with those plans. Al's weapon was now tracking between and Ra, as if he couldn't decide which target represented the greater threat. Such disclosure would cause galaxy-wide panic and potentially result in the deaths of billions, as species attempt futile resistance against humanity's forces. Perhaps, agreed, but it would also ensure that the choice is made with complete information rather than carefully managed propaganda. Every being would understand exactly what they're agreeing to when they choose conversion. The veteran's voice took on a quality of desperate urgency. The galactic leadership has decided that civilian populations are not capable of making informed decisions about their own existence. They're implementing conversion programs designed to make the choice seem voluntary while ensuring only one option is actually available. Ra realized that her recording device had been capturing everything, including details that could expose the scope of governmental collaboration with humanity's plans. How many species leadership have already agreed to conversion? All of them, Al admitted, his voice carrying the weight of someone revealing information he would prefer to keep secret. Every major species in the Galactic Council has signed preliminary agreements for voluntary conversion of their populations. The timeline calls for complete galactic integration within 50 standard years. The commander's weapon remained trained on, but his attention was clearly divided between multiple threats. The choice has already been made at levels of authority that supersede individual preferences. Disclosure of this information would only complicate the transition process. His mandibles clicked rapidly as he addressed Ra directly. Your recording device contains enough information to expose the complete conspiracy, but only if you can escape this bay and transmit the data before they activate the conversion equipment that's already been installed throughout this station. Ra felt cold understanding wash over her as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Station Omega-7 is a conversion facility. Has been for 6 months, confirmed. Every major population center in the galaxy now has conversion facilities operating under cover of medical or research installations. The infrastructure for galactic integration is already in place. Al's weapon was,